In this video, I'd like to show how to make a bar graph showing the average values from multiple sets of data and also including whisker error bars that are going to show the standard deviation. So the data set that we're using here, these are 4 different mass measurements that were collected for 10 milliliter delivery of water using different types of glassware: graduate cylinder, volumetric flask, volumetric pipette, and more pipette. And so I've calculated the average and the standard deviation for each of these individual 4 replicates for each of the different glassware types. If you need help for calculating this average and standard deviation value, I have a video for that as well that you can check out. So what we'd like to do is plot these average values for each of these different glassware types and then the standard deviation as the error bars. So this is a pretty simple function to do here. So first we're going to select all of the data, including the headers that have our different glassware types. So for whenever you're making plots, whether it's a scatter plot or a bar graph, you usually want to have that upper left-hand corner cell, you want that to be totally open. You don't want to have a label in there, or sometimes it messes up the Excel operation. So once you have all the data that you would like to plot highlighted, and so here it's rather simple because we only have one set of data for 4 different types of glassware. We're going to go up to the Insert tab. We're going to go over to our charts here, and we're going to click our bar graphs. And then here we're just going to do a very simple 2D graph. Okay, so we can see that Excel does some basic formatting here for us. So one thing that we have here is that Excel has already kind of auto corrected our y-axis, and so it's only showing the very tops of the plots. So if that's what you want, you can keep it the way it is. I typically like to format my axis, so what I did there is I left-clicked on the axis, and then I pressed right-click down to Format Axis, and that makes this tab pop up on the right-hand side. So on this Format Axis, we have these different lines here. On these different tabs on the far right, this is our format axis, and we can change our upper and lower bounds. So I like to start my bounds there at 0 so we can actually look at the data, and then we can adjust the maximum if you'd like. Okay, so the difference there is when we had the data the previous way, so I'm just going to click undo real quick. It looks like there's a very large variation between our data when we really zoom in right at the very top. But if we adjust our minimum bounds to 0, you can see here that now it doesn't really appear that there's very much difference at all. Okay, so it depends on how you want to present your data. Okay, so we have our data presented here. Again, also one of the formatting things here, it has lots of decimal places, 4 different decimal places here. And on our graph, we really don't need that much precision there. So we can, again, under our format axis here, if we scroll all the way down to the bottom, we can see number. And we open up here, we can see the number of decimal places here. So we can change that. In this case, we don't need any decimal places. We can change it to 0. Other things that we can change is we can open it up and just do a general. That's going to give us no decimals. We could change it to any different type we wanted, if we wanted scientific notation, etc. But here I think general is appropriate. So the graph has done a nice job at formatting in that it's already labeled each of our different columns with our different glassware type. We've adjusted our y-axis here, and so we're on a good start. So there's a few formatting things that I'd like to adjust before we put on our error bars, just to make sure that the graph looks nice and presentable. So first off, you're going to be including captions below your individual plots. So I'm not a big fan of having chart titles. If you want to include a chart title, it's not wrong or anything, but personally I think if you have a caption, it is unnecessary. So I typically will press and then delete the chart title. Also, I'm not a big fan of the grid lines on a plot, so I'll usually click those, left click those, and then press delete for those as well. So we can see that the default for Excel has the text and lines in this very light gray color. So that if your graph is kind of small, or if you have an older person reading the graph, it makes it quite difficult for them to actually be able to visualize your axes, and it just doesn't look as polished to me. So some of the formatting that I do for the graph is that I will, again, left click on each of the axes. So first we'll start with the y-axis. If we go over to home, we can change the size of this text up to, I always do size 16 for my numbers. And then I will also click out again and go to the color of the text and change it from that gray to a nice black. The next step, we can see that there's no actual line here or any tick marks. So you can click on the plot here. Again, so if you already have this formatting box open, you can just keep working with it. If that's not open, again, you can right click on the axes, go down to Format Axis, and that will open up the screen again. So to input our nice black line for the y-axis, we can go over to the far left, which will be the fill and line. We can click that, and then we're going to click line. Input a solid line, change the color of that line to black, and then make it a little thicker to 1.5. So now we have a nice looking black line for our y-axis. The next thing that we want to input here are some tick marks. So we go down. So on our format axis, we go all the way to the right again to format axis. And if we go back down, we can see tick marks, and we want major tick marks on the outside. So we have this axis here formatted quite nicely. Now we'd like to have our x-axis formatted. So again, we'll left click on our x-axis. We can go up, change our text size to 16, and then we can change our color to black. Next, we can change the line to a nice thick black line. So again, on format axis, if we go over to the paint can, we add a solid line that's going to be black in color. And then we can change that again to 1.5 formatting. And then again, the tick marks, we go back over to axis options on the bottom. We can put tick marks major on the outside. So now we can see that this plot is starting to get really nice and formatted. So one thing that we're missing here is an axis label for our y-axis. So on Excel, so we can close out this formatting box for now. When we click back on our plot, you can see that there is a plus sign here on the right-hand side when you click it. So you can press left click on that, and that will give us our options for chart elements. And it opens up here, and then we want to include the axis title. Okay, so we left click that. And so what it did is it input an axis title for the X axis and the Y. We don't need our axis title for the X axis because it's inherent in our individual names. But we do want to input our axis title for the Y axis. So we can click this and then put, this is going to be our mass of water in grams. Okay, so you can either put parentheses for grams or you can put comma grams. So parentheses is standard practice. So now we can see that we have our y-axis is labeled. Again, we'd want to make that black in color, and I like to make my labels size 20. And you can kind of center and format things here. So since we only have one set of data, which is just average, we do not need a legend here. If we had more than one set of data, multiple colors of bars, then we would need an individual, a legend here to describe what's going on. But in this case, we are totally fine. So the size 16 and size 20 that I use, that is not necessary to, you don't have to use those numbers specifically. Those are just what I use. You can choose whatever you'd like. So the last part of this tutorial is to put in our standard deviation error bars. So to do that, you're going to click on the data again, And then on the right-hand side for chart elements, you'll click the chart elements and then go down to error bars. And then we're going to click our error bars. And so we can see here there's these tiny little error bars that formed here. Okay, and we want to format them and input them so it's actually the standard deviation values. So we can either, if you can click yourself on those error bars individually and right click on them, or you could also, for the plus side for error bars, if we choose this arrow here, we can give us to more options. And so again, that's going to open up our formatting tab here. And we can scroll down to the bottom and say that we want custom error bars. So the Excel will try to calculate the standard deviation or the standard error for your data, but really I found it doesn't do a great job. It's best if we input the value that we calculate ourselves. So if we click custom, left click, and then left click again on specify value, it will give us an input for our positive and negative error bars. So we can delete the input they have, go back to our data, and then we're going to highlight the standard deviation column for all of our data. Okay, for the positive, and then we're also going to input the standard deviation on the negative. So that's the upper whisker for positive and the bottom whisker for negative. Once we press OK, we're going to see now that we now have our individual error bars that are put into our plot.